So first I would like to say namaste and swaga, and I realise I've just butchered that with my Australian accent, but I hope you recognise it as me saying hello and welcome to you. So I'm kind of curious, I'd like to start with this talk asking if you're familiar with what imposter syndrome is. Is this something that's kind of like fairly familiar, yeah? If not, you're going to learn a lot about it here. And I'm also keen to know, this is not a test, I'm just curious, is anyone in this room an imposter right now? Okay, very interesting. Oh, I've got a couple of brave people. I have always wanted to come to India, and you know, there's something kind of special between India and Australia in particular, and like cricket for sure, right? That is absolutely the number one. In fact, somebody gave me some advice last night and said, to tell you that my very first job that I ever did in games, because I came from film originally, was the motion capture for Ricky Ponting. I got to motion capture him for the Ricky Ponting cricket game, console cricket game in 2007. So we know that's like a common love between Australia and India. But you guys probably don't know that curries as well is a common staple for us. And when I Googled it the other day, they actually said there was 3 C's that we have in common. The third one was the Commonwealth. But I kind of would rather say that it's a mutual desire to leave the monarchy. That's kind of where Australia come from too. Now, that is a weird way to start my speech. I realise that. I've already put my foot in my mouth a little bit. So this is a good time to go to my disclaimer, which is any of the personal opinions expressed in this talk are solely my thoughts, feelings and ideas. They do not necessarily reflect those of my employer, my company, or even my nation necessarily. They are based on my personal research, my experience, my observations through my pretty long career in game development. And my stories are subjective and anecdotal, so therefore not designed to be taken as any official legal, accounting, or medical advice. Now that we're kind of clear on that, I'm allowed to put my foot in my mouth a little bit more. Let me introduce myself. My name is Kendra Fairbairn McCarthy, and I'm the founder and studio head for Tantalus North in sunny Queensland. In 2021, I was very fortunate to be headhunted by the CEO of Tantalus Media, which is a very long-standing studio in Australia, based in Melbourne. And I was given the opportunity to start my very own game development studio in Queensland, where I live. Now, my core crew for Tantalus North are only 13 developers, 14 including me, but they are absolutely world-class developers. And combined, we have over 170 years of industry experience. We've shipped over 100 console games, and we've worked across basically every platform that's ever existed. So I have this tiny team in Queensland, and we kind of feel like a bit of an indie team and a tight-knit family unit, which I'm very proud of. But we're actually part of something much, much bigger than just ourselves. We are very proud to be a part of Keyword Studios. Now, as part of Keyword Studios, we've got powerful international backing and connections to all the leading AAA console game publishers. So my team get to work on the very coolest franchises on the market. But more importantly, we're very fortunate to be part of the Keywords family of sister studios, where we have 72 different studios across 26 countries and over 12,000 developers that we can access and work with. And we're all aligned in a partnership with this common vision for our shared success. So I'm super proud to work for Keywords. And why am I here? Well, this is kind of some of my resume highlights. I've built the largest motion capture studio in the Southern Hemisphere for Sega. That was one of my very first jobs in game development, and that was for the London Olympics video game. I've built development teams that span the world for Kixeye. My art team was based in Vietnam, US, Canada, Australia, and we provided content to 6 live MMORTS games, and at the same time, I was the studio head for the 2 studios in Australia. So I think I've kind of reached a certain level of success where people think I could do a talk like this at a game development conference. But if I am totally authentic in my retelling of this opportunity, it kind of started out with, I've always wanted to go to India, this is an amazing opportunity, and I'm really proud to work for Keywords, and I want to represent them at IGDC. But then I started to think, I look good on paper, but I don't really feel like I'm an expert in anything. And I wondered, what value would I have to offer at a conference like this about leadership? I'm not even sure what I'd even talk about. So I always just think I've been super lucky in my career. I've never actually sat an official interview before for my game development roles. And I know it takes me a lot longer to prepare for something like this. I thought to myself, I definitely don't have enough time. If I do this, I am going to look like a total idiot. And soon everybody will realise I'm not as good as they think I am. So I'm actually here to confess to you my biggest fear, and that is I'm kind of good at faking confidence when I feel like I have to. But deep down, I have these persistent feelings, sometimes very, very intensely, especially right now, in every step of like what everybody else would consider a pretty successful career. So I'd like to reintroduce myself. My name is Kendra, and I am an expert in the imposter syndrome experience. Now, I'm kind of wondering, can anybody else relate to these feelings? I hope so, because otherwise I look like a bit of a fool. But, you know, have you ever thought that you've only been successful due to luck, or knowing the right person, or charming your way into an opportunity? Or that you just work much longer and harder than everyone else, and that's why you're able to meet the same standards as your colleagues that you secretly think are much better than you? Or do you ever feel super overwhelmed, like you've been assigned some task that feels like it's way above your capabilities, but you must deliver it, everybody's expecting you to deliver it, and they're depending on you? So I guess when I started my game development career at Kixeye, I was their art producer, and we hired this really amazing graphic artist to work on our UI. Like 2 weeks into the role, he resigned, and I was really super worried. I was like, what did we do? So I called him into my office and I asked him, why did you resign? What have we done? And he said to me, I'm just not good enough to do this job. And I remember telling him that we all feel like that, and I just thought, and I told him that I thought he could do it, that we would figure it out, and that we could figure it out together. Then I told him to get back to work. It wasn't the way he thought that resignation was going to go. He actually worked for us for about 9 years after that. So we didn't know there was a name for it at the time, but this is the imposter syndrome experience. And this is endemic to our industry. This is much more than normal feelings of self-doubt. This is the persistent fear that you're not as good as others think you are, and therefore you're a fraud. It doesn't go away the more successful you become. It actually continues to get worse with every new amazing opportunity. It's actually the inability to internalize your own achievements and successes, and feelings of certainty that you're not good enough and you don't belong. So even back early in my career in games, I knew it was a common thing, but I kind of thought it was an artist thing. I thought it was part of that tortured artist stereotype. So I put it down to, art is super subjective. You get constant feedback, you feel very vulnerable, and you get it basically from anybody with eyeballs, not just your art director, but from your team, from your executives, from your publisher, from the players. So I kind of thought maybe that's just really hard on your ego. But it's actually much more universal in game development than just the creatives. I am pretty much constantly flawed that whenever I talk to the most senior developers I know, the most senior executives and entrepreneurs in our business, that they say they have the exact same feelings. In fact, 2 weeks ago, I was at a conference in Melbourne, and I was talking to the principal engineer from Riot Games, and I told him I was very nervous about doing my first talk at a game conference like this. And he told me, you absolutely must do it, because for the last 25 years of my career, and still to this day, I think I'm an imposter too. And it was actually that day that I wrote to Raju and said, I'm going to do this. So psychological studies show that over the last 5 decades, that 75% of people who are very successful suffer these feelings of imposter syndrome. That is literally 3/4 of this room right here, but I didn't see 3/4 of the room put their hand up when I asked if you feel like an imposter. And that's because nobody talks about it. I mean, you'd have to be kind of crazy to tell your employer and everybody else in a room full of people that you think you're kind of crap and a bit of a fraud. I think this is being recorded. Hi, boss. Now, love or hate Jira, this man's success is absolutely indisputable. He is the co-founder and CEO of Atlassian, and we all use his software. He's also the winner of Australian Entrepreneur of the Year award, and he is literally a billionaire, and yet at the very peak of his success, he said this is exactly how he feels too. And when I was actually researching this, the old logo for Atlassian I found kind of comical. It actually looks like somebody bent over with the weight of the world on his shoulders. So, why do I feel like this in game development? Well, I think we're all pretty aware that there's a lot of challenges and unique characteristics in this industry, and it's obviously intensely competitive. And it's not just at the industry or product scale, but also for talent vying for those limited number of jobs on cool games. The industry is also characterised by rapid technological advancements and endless innovation, constant adaptation to new technology, tools, processes. It definitely makes you feel like you're always falling behind and that there's just a little bit too much to know. Devs are also expected to constantly innovate, push the boundaries of what's possible in gaming, and recreate groundbreaking experiences and near-perfect visual fidelity. And that's on Switch and mobile platforms too, right? So you also have a lot of public scrutiny, negative reviews, angry forums certainly exacerbate those feelings of being an imposter. But another thing I've been thinking about since I worked in the film industry, and I didn't really see it as prevalent in the film industry as the games, is that this is a very young industry and it's not really yet an established institution. There's lack of clear pathways for educational training and requirements to break into the industry. But also, once you're in the industry, what is your career path for progression? It's not always very clear. And one of my examples is every company I've worked at, they use the term producer, project manager, product manager completely differently. And that uncertainty is pretty confusing. You've also got the perception versus reality. Like, from everybody from outside of this industry thinks this has to be just the funnest place to work, right? Like QA testing is a gamer's dream job, and every gamer thinks they've got great ideas to make a game. Or the pressure from your family who had expectations that you might have a real job and be successful like a doctor or an accountant like your brother. So I think the lack of understanding how challenging this industry is and how hard this job can be certainly reinforces those feelings of self-doubt. I think it also leads to individuals really working a lot of overtime in order to ensure their success and legitimise their kind of unconventional career choice that most people see as a hobby. Now, I won't go through everything on this list, but I feel like by looking at this, why wouldn't you have imposter syndrome in this industry? But I also kind of look at it from a scientific and human perspective. When you sense the expectations on you exceed your capabilities, this or not, you react with fear. And recognising the impact of these imposter thoughts, your mind and body actually are interpreting this as a threat. Every new task, every new opportunity is perceived as a risk, and this one will be the task that proves that you're not as capable as everybody thinks you are. So if this is the moment that you're going to be exposed, embarrassed, and rejected, and finally feel like everybody else is going to know what you've always thought, that you don't belong, well, that's fear. And there's actually a biological and psychological humans actually have a biological and psychological need for acceptance. We are hardwired to seek safety in numbers, in groups, in our family units, in our communities, in our country. And we're programmed from children to seek validation and approval right from infancy and rewarded for behaviours that people think are acceptable. And conversely, we're also punished and conditioned through negative social emotions like embarrassment, shame, rejection if we do the wrong thing. Now, I think it's fairly evident that the most powerful experiences for humans are the painful and shameful ones. I know I don't obsess about any compliments I get. It is definitely about the negative feedback that I receive. I think that's fairly standard. Also, the field of neuroscience has proven that fear is a fundamental emotion that plays this crucial role in human survival. When you feel fear, a physical response is automatically activated in order to respond to that imminent threat. This is completely involuntary and intuitive response called the flight-fight. And it's signaled from the most primitive part of your brain called the amygdala and your limbic system. I just pronounced that really weird, amygdala, and your limbic system. So when you feel fear, hormones flood your body, adrenaline and cortisol increase your heart rate, your breathing becomes very rapid and shallow, your muscles tense, ready for action, and your vision and your focus actually narrow to filter out anything other than that oncoming threat. So I think probably most of us are fairly familiar with this concept of flight-fight, but there is something that I learned that I found really interesting. That is, when you experience flight-fight, your higher level functions of your brain, that is the cortex and your neocortex, actually go offline so that your primitive brain, that's the amygdala, can take over and act instinctively in order to avoid that danger. So that part of your brain that is responsible for the executive functioning, like rational problem solving, critical thinking, and analysis, actually become unavailable to you. Another fact that I learned is this is actually a reverse loop cycle. So if you feel fearful thoughts in your mind and it triggers your body automatically, but when your body is in a heightened state of arousal, that is, your flight-fight has been activated, it actually triggers your subconscious mind, your amygdala, to be prioritised so that you can scan the environment and work out where the threat is coming from. So apparently, in this field of neuroscience, they've proven that when your amygdala is activated and prioritised like this, humans interpret neutral facial expressions and neutral tone of voice as negatively and much more threatening than they actually are. This totally clicked for me because I've seen this in play a lot before within my team dynamics. So I've rambled on a bit about the science. What's the takeaways from this? Well, we have a negative biased brain and that it's actually designed this way on purpose in order to help you survive. So if you're constantly experiencing thoughts and fears that you're an imposter and you are bound to be exposed, you might feel like you are constantly stressed, right? But this is actually prolonged periods of this flight-fight instinct, and it's referred to hyperarousal of your nervous system. Humans are designed to withstand just very, very short bursts of this duration of this stress hormone, just enough to give you that burst of energy to fight off your attacker or flee from the crocodile, or I guess shark if you're in Australia. But if you never feel safe and you have this deep-seated fear that you will be exposed and rejected, face the loss of respect and potentially the loss of your career and your livelihood, then you are in very long, prolonged states of hyperarousal and might not even be aware of it. I think we've all heard that chronic stress is pretty bad for you physically and mentally. That cortisol stress hormone that you release when you're in prolonged states of hyperarousal is proven to cause heart disease and high blood pressure, but it also changes the way you breathe to very shallow, rapid breaths like we talked about before. And we know that it deteriorates our sleep, our immunity, our mood, our tolerance, and now I also understand that it impacts my ability to learn, analyse, solve problems, and even read social cues like facial expressions properly. So this prolonged periods of hyperarousal inevitably leads to what's known as hypoarousal, and this is when your body is in a forced shutdown state in order to recuperate. You feel completely burnt out, you have zero energy or creative spark, you feel low, you think very low thoughts, and you often withdraw. So it's pretty obvious when you look at it like this, I think, that your imposter thoughts are having a negative impact on your ability to perform in game development. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yet, I think it's pretty common knowledge too that we live lives under constant pressure, and feeling stressed is kind of a prerequisite for our modern existence. I mean, you're expected to always be on, but never as much as when you're also working in game development. This is a bit of a cheesy infographic that I made to describe some of the ways I've seen fear and imposter syndrome manifest in game development. You get the perfectionist who works copious amounts of overtime in order to complete tasks perfectly, so that they're not exposed as a fraud, and they struggle to show any unfinished work, get feedback throughout their task, and burnout is pretty much imminent for them. The micromanager who can't trust to delegate anything to anybody else, like that perfectionist, they struggle to collaborate or create lots of extra work for themselves, and that's usually at the expense of their team. You've got the procrastinator who stalls on every task that they fear might expose them, and it really takes the pressure of a looming deadline before they can tackle that challenge. This leads to really unpredictable deliveries and really hard to rely on early on a sprint. We also get over-analyzers who are so afraid to make a mistake and be exposed that they scrutinise every option, dissect every scenario, and freeze in the face of having to make an actual decision. They have what we call the analysis paralysis. I've also seen victims, when things are going wrong, to try to deflect attention, they blame somebody else and create someone as a villain. That builds this us versus them mentality in your organisations and in your teams. Or the second guesser who sometimes, even when everything is going absolutely perfectly, feel the need to constantly over-apologise and justify or make excuses for what they're doing. They never really trust their own judgment, take a lot of energy to manage, they can be kind of exhausting to keep on track. So, okay, how do we help? Since I've started researching this, I've found a few things that really helped me. And one of them was realising that it's happening and the impact that it's happening on you. My first thing I've started telling myself daily is stop believing your thoughts. Your thoughts are subjective, they're contextual, and they're not actually facts. Thoughts can be triggered by things outside of your conscious control, like the flight-fight response, or past traumas, or even expectations that have been imposed on you from your parents and your partners. So I try to now catch myself in the moment. When I was writing this IGDC speech, I remember telling myself, every time I told myself, I'm not good enough to do this, I would instead go, I notice I keep telling myself a story that I'm not good enough. That's kind of interesting. This helped me immediately remove myself from that instinct of fear and become a bit more of an observer of my thoughts and my stories. I also remind myself now that the science shows that fear is not really my fault. My brain is designed this way to protect me from danger, and that's why I'm having these feelings and feel very triggered. I'm not actually in danger, there's no shark in this room, I'm safe. And then I tell my brain, stop doom scrolling. I kind of liken my brain to the internet, and every time I think about something negative, my internal Google Analytics go, and show me much more of the same negative thoughts. So I guess subconsciously, it might not be your fault that you're triggered this way, but now that you know it is, it's certainly up to you to consciously decide what you're going to do about it. Now, that kind of mindfulness helped me a little bit, but it definitely didn't really end the cycle. And like the science shows you, your mind triggers your body into that hyper-aroused state, but your body triggers your mind as well. So the most important thing is figuring out techniques to calm your central nervous system. And I found a couple body hacks that really worked for me. One of them is breath retention exercises, because when you can calm your body, when your body is calm, you breathe deep and slow and your heart rate is steady. So if you can relax when your mind is racing and you're in a very negative space, the calm physiological state will actually start signaling your mind that you're no longer in danger and will switch off that cycle and basically deprioritize your amygdala again, which will help you. The other things that I found other things that instinctively relax an agitated physiological state is rhythmic rocking. And believe it or not, this sounds kind of weird, but rocking on a rocking chair, swinging on a swing, and even skipping naturally relaxes your body. My pretty amazing product manager always says to me, you can't really be in a bad mood or pissed off or stressed out if you're skipping. So sometimes we just skip around the studio and look like idiots. This is why we instinctively rock a baby to calm it down. It's why the ocean feels so good, and it's why we're drawn to music and rhythmic sounds. It's actually relaxing and good for you. I think also understanding your window of tolerance, it's called, which is when you're in a prolonged hyper-aroused state, you are triggered much more easily. And being mindful of this helps you navigate when it's time to take some downtime. Are you more agitated, snappy, or impatient than you would ordinarily or kind of would like to be? That's because you're on at the edge of your window of tolerance and getting closer to a hypo-aroused state. That's the shutdown state. You need to prioritize rest of your central nervous system. I think the other thing is set up support networks. The worst thing about imposter syndrome is that we're kind of afraid to be exposed, so we don't really talk about it. But when you isolate yourself, to try not feeling so vulnerable, this further alienates you, reinforcing those feelings that you don't belong. So I think it's okay to be a proud work in progress, have a growth mindset, and it's kind of okay to not know everything and still be learning and evolving, I tell myself, even at my age. Here's my other little cheesy slide that's how do you turn your personal kryptonite into your leadership superpower? So if you're an imposter syndrome expert and have the unique ability to detect and help other developers, you can recognize apprehension, doubt, anxiety, self-serving behaviours and withdrawal for what they actually are and know how to support your team. This is no false platitudes or empty compliments. That's not a cure for imposter syndrome. In fact, it makes it much worse in your developers. Be direct with your expectations and recognise both their talents and their challenges. It's okay to remind them that, oops, I lost my place. It's okay to remind them that you're going to leverage their strengths and set them up for success in their role, and that the team that you're building is designed to cover over their weaknesses. Like, nobody is expected to be awesome at everything. So I also think creating a good company culture is crucial to combat the pitfalls of imposter syndrome. Inclusivity is a core function for all humans. We need to feel like we belong in order to operate at our best. An inclusive, considerate culture is fuel for your team's innovation. And I think also knowing and constantly talking about change is really scary for humans. And in game development, everything is always changing all of the time. Remind your team that it's all right to be scared, that it's normal when something's unknown, and lead them through changes by showing them that you're brave in the face of unknowns and that you trust them, and no matter what, even if they fail, you're still going to have their backs. Not everything you attempt will be an immediate success. I think another one that's pretty important to acknowledge is when somebody in your team transitions to a management role, whether that's a project management role or managing staff, it's kind of a bit of a sense of loss of identity. When you were an IC, like an individual contributor, you could actually point at the things that you contributed, but when you're managing projects, it becomes a bit invisible and less direct. You can no longer really identify what it is that you contribute, and the better that your team performs, the more invisible you're actually seen. So mentor your staff on what to expect and tell them that this is totally normal And they just need to remember their purpose, and that is to serve their team. And finally, I think be the best example as a leader. You also operate at your best when you're not in a constantly hyper-aroused imposter experiencing state. You'll have more energy, more patience, more compassion when you also prioritise your own physical and mental well-being. As a leader, I think don't fake it till you make it. I hate that saying, and I always get told that whenever I tell anybody that I feel nervous. It's better to be authentic and talk openly about your own failures and insecurities. This helps remind your team that it's okay to learn and grow from your mistakes, and you can inspire their trust through your transparency. And lastly, be brave. Show them it's okay to do things that's completely out of your comfort zone. Give yourself permission to be afraid, potentially look like a fool, and then just do it anyway. Because if you really mess up and fail, you'll still have a really cool story to tell your team when you come back from India. Now, I'd like to say thank you so much. As you could tell, I was very nervous. This was my first talk at a game developer conference like this. But you've been a really nice and generous audience. Thank you for giggling at my awkward bits. Thank you. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Or I can take them outside as well, yeah.
What do you feel about addressing something that's not as tangible as a skill set? Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Yeah?
Yeah. I think what's unique about this industry is that passion is what drives a lot of people to join games. I know a lot of money can be made in other aspects of technology, but ultimately, every single time I talk to a candidate, it is, I've been playing games since I was a kid.
Absolutely.
But what happens when you get imposter syndrome with something like passion, maybe another teammate or something like that is doing better or reading up more on, updates in the industry, and ultimately you feel like I don't have enough passion to keep up with what they're able to offer.
Yep. That kind of sounds to me like that hyper-aroused state where you've been pushing so hard and really burning yourself out and you lose that creative spark. That's very, very common. And I think the most important thing to say in that situation is you do have the passion. You just need to have a little bit of a break and re-find it. So I went through that. I used to be a cinematographer in the film industry, and after doing it in the business for a long time, I absolutely lost my passion for it. I felt completely creatively dry. I stopped filming altogether. And so I decided that I was going to start, I changed careers actually to try to re-find it, and I've refound my passion through my hobby instead. So sometimes I think the unconventional path, maybe if you find something else that you really love. I would play a lot of music, I would learn guitar and things like that, help me bring that creative spark back and a bit of passion. That would probably be my best advice for a team member that came to me and said, I don't really feel like I have the passion anymore. They just sound like they're super burnt out, really. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more questions?
I think we run slightly over time, but I'm happy to answer anything. I kind of stand out
there,
here.
Just from experience, I just want to ask you, how do you guys deal with the situation I see kind of sometimes often at teams that I've worked in, and sometimes it's hard to unravel if it's really imposter syndrome or it's something else, and then you start telling yourself that it's imposter syndrome. How do you know that's actually what it is, and you're taking healthy responses to deal with that, as opposed to kind of just sometimes you hide in a shell, and sometimes that becomes a protective shell with means you're not taking the, as leaders, how do we spot that that's happening?
Yeah,
Is there something that you do? That kind of thing.
That's interesting. I think most of the time, people who have imposter syndrome don't actually realise that that's what it is. If your team member is rocking around saying, I am the biggest imposter and that's why I needed to be wrapped in cotton wool and treated a certain way, I kind of would call their bullshit, I think, a little bit and say, no, that's self-doubt, that's slightly different to imposter
What if I think
syndrome.
I'm not good enough to call the bullshit?
Yeah, that's
so,
right.
the imposter syndrome, Inception.
I like that. Yeah, yep. That hasn't actually happened to me, but I'm going to call that bullshit out if I ever hear it in my team. Oh, I think that's it. I think we've got to move on for the next speaker, but thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity. Oh, there was one? I'm
Sorry, there was another question here. Yeah, I just pass the mic here.
What if I'm right in my paranoia and I am an imposter? Like, how do you know that these moments of doubts you're having about your own capability are there's not an element of truth in them?
Oh, sorry, I couldn't figure out where you were coming from. Sorry, can you repeat that again? I was like scanning to try to find where the
See,
voice was coming from.
there's a line somewhere where either you're being overly critical about your own ability, or there is an element of truth to your self-criticism. And what if you're right? And how do you know where on that line you lie?
Yeah, I think there is an element of truth to it, right? Like, being an imposter isn't necessarily that you're incredible and super successful. Like, you're just really focusing on your self-doubts instead of seeing yourself as a bit of a more holistic person who has the strengths and weaknesses. For example, when I rehearsed this speech, I didn't need to read my notes, but I got so nervous once I got up here, that's all I did. I know I'm going to go and beat myself up about that, but, you know, it's really, there is this line between self-criticising and trying to improve your performance. I'm definitely going to try to do more of these so I get better at it. But it's that balance again. Like, you may have imposter syndrome, but you might also be a bit crap as well, and that's okay. That's absolutely okay. Does that answer your question all right?
Yeah, kind of.